So without any further ado, the reason you guys came here tonight, the Dr. Paul Kress. Yeah.
He truly knows nothing about my integrity. I mean, do you? Do you know anything about my integrity?
I've gotten some books.
And here are my notes. So when you see the last lecture series, how many of you have had a class from me before? So, wow, so you should know better than to be here. I'm sorry for this. When they say it's your last lecture, that's kind of scary at my age, because who knows what will happen. I am the oldest full-time prof on campus. I don't know if that's a good thing. I remember once upon a time at a place in California where I was the youngest full-time prof on campus. People ignored me now, they ignored me then. So I'm kind of accustomed to this. How many of you have heard lectures before? All of you have heard lectures? How many lectures have I heard? Or if somebody's lecturing and nobody's listening, is it a lecture? Yeah, I don't know. So here's one of the things that some of my students do. If you're not listening, lean forward and look like you are. Because you might show something and might learn something along the way. Some of my students know how to do that. If you're accustomed to gambling, that's called a tell. If you have a tell, and give it away. Some of my students have tells, and I like to discover what they are. First set of lectures I heard were from my parents. Little secret, all your profs were once kids. You do understand that. All your profs had parents. And so I heard, how many lectures did I hear from my parents? My father was older than my grandmother. Does that make sense? Come on, you're college people, you've got to figure this out. It's not that difficult. My father was older than my grandmother. No, not wiser. Well, maybe he was, but no, I'm talking about, my father was older than my grandmother. When my mother took my dad home to meet her mother, my dad was older than my mom's mom. Figure that out? Is that weird? Is that scary? But Dad was born in 1891 in rural South Dakota, and Mom was born in 1912 in Oklahoma. And those two folks, my mother left Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl and came out in the, what is that name of that book by John Steinbeck? Grapes of Wrath. She came out like that and was an Okie. And they kind of somehow or another got together during World War II because all the eligible bachelors were in Europe fighting the Hun, and so my parents got together. What was it like being raised in Southern California with parents who came from cultures of the Midwest? Did you think I got some lectures? Yeah, a lot of lectures. What about being in school? How many lectures did I get in school? A lot of lectures. I was in school kindergarten through 12. Let's count them out. What does that make? 13. Who said 12? Probably a psych major or maybe a Bible major or something like that. Not a business major. No, okay. So a lot of lectures. So 1 through 12 was K through 12 was 13 years. Junior high, high school, college, 4 years of college, 3 years of seminary. Does it show? Yeah, okay. And then graduate school at the University of San Francisco, which was a Jesuit school. When did I start listening? When did I stop listening? Not listening to lectures carries some consequences. When I didn't listen to my parents' lecture, two kinds of consequences. One was sit in the corner. You're not listening, you're not doing what you're told to do, go sit in the corner. So I went and sat in the corner, and they had something then called, I don't think they have them today, they're called encyclopedias. You know what those look like? It's kind of in book form. And we had them over in the corner, and I would go sit in the corner where they had encyclopedias. It's for you today, it would be like your parents say, go sit in the corner with your cell phone. I mean, is that really punishment? That's not a lot of punishment. That's not consequences for not listening. But the other kind of punishment for not listening from my parents was the belt. See, it was long time ago. And there was this one belt that came one Sunday morning, and goodness sakes, Mom got the wrong end of the belt. And it was the buckle instead of the other end. And it made a nice welt. And I was able to say, look what you've done. Oh, junior high. Do you listen in junior high? Yeah, I still remember the English teacher who said, step out of class. I stepped out of class. I wasn't listening. And he threw me up against the lockers. And he said, you will never say things like that again in my class. And I didn't. I learned but then there was PE. You know what they did in PE? It was a tennis shoe. It was on the backside, and it left the imprints. All of the imprints were there. And they don't do that anymore. Do they? No. Sarah, do you do that here?
We could start.
Yeah. You know, and then I got to high school, and I truly didn't listen to anybody in high school except one person, and that was my coach. But by listening to my coach, the whole idea of what I learned from my coach in playing basketball is what I later applied to this thing called academics when finally that other world came along. The world of academics didn't come to me early, it came to me late. So what happened was my parents said, you know, Mom and Dad have only an 8th grade education, but we have a hunch we don't understand the world the way other people understand the world. People with an education seem to have a better understanding of what life is like. So they said, we want you to go to 1 year of college, 1 year of Christian college. Then they called it Bible college. Actually, it was Bible Institute. It's what this was all those years ago. And so I went to 1 year of Bible Institute, and suddenly there was a teacher that stood in front of me, and he said, you know, you don't think very well. You don't talk very well. You certainly don't write well, and your manners are atrocious. And then the question becomes, what am I going to do with that prof? Am I going to listen to him, or am I not going to listen to him? Because this is what becomes clear. The teachers you decide to listen to will impact your life. They will change your life, for the good or for the bad. So if you listen to one teacher, it'll change it one way. If you listen to another teacher, it'll change it another way. When I was working in San Francisco at a little Christian college there, I was looking for a church, and one of the churches I thought about going to was the People's Temple. Later, it was by Jim Jones. Later, that whole group moved to Guyana and Jonestown, and then 900 of them drank the Kool-Aid. What would I have been like if I had gone into that church? What would have happened to me? How would I have changed in a different way if I had listened to that particular pastor? Because, my goodness, how many pastors have I listened to? You know, schools like this used to have chapel 5 days a week. You struggle with it being 2 days a week, and they give you credit for this, don't you? Good thing, or else no one would be here. That's the same way it works in class. I teach required classes, else who would show up? They wouldn't show up. Just the way it works. But this guy spoke, and I listened. It changed who I became, and it changed what I became, which is all part of the process and all part of the reason for lectures. So here, tonight, I'm going to give you what? I'm going to moralize. What am I going to do? Give you some advice? Talk to you about things that are important to me? Was it Nate that came up with it? Where'd Nate? Oh, he left. Oh, there he is. Okay. Nate came up with this idea about having this happen, and then he said to us, think deeply. which is a goal I've had for my students, and I just struggle with that. And so I have a student, former student at least, telling me to think deeply. And do we want that today? Do we want that today?
Yes, sir.
Do we want to be different than we came? Yeah, maybe so, maybe so. So, for those of you that choose to listen, I have 3 things that are important to me. Because think deeply about what's important to you. I have 3 things that are important to me. And if you don't want to listen, if you're just here for the chapel credit, do they have to scan when you leave? Is that what happens as well? Yeah. So you scan when you come in and then scan and go? So you're a captive audience, okay. Okay, no, we did that. You know, actually prepare. Do you know that? And I personally think the Holy Spirit works in the preparation process. I know a lot of times people think, well, I'll just get up and the Holy Spirit will help me when I get up there. I think it works the other way around. I often have students say, would you pray before we take the test? And then I say, yeah, and then my prayer is, God help them to respond on the test to the degree to which they've prepared. Nobody wants me to pray for them the next time. They think it's magic or something like that, and it's not magic. So 3 things that matter to me. The first thing that matters to me is your career. You're in college for a reason. You're in college to prepare. The preparation you do now will determine the kind of person that you're going to be later. If you skip something now, then you won't be prepared for later. I detest it when Christians go out unprepared. I detest it when Christians are naive. You know, one of the little things I have, and those of you that have been in my classes, you'll hear stuff that I've said in class. So I don't want Christians to be naive. I want them to be innocent, but not ignorant. You know the difference between the two. Innocence means that you have some level of purity there still about yourself. But ignorance is that you don't understand what's going on anywhere else in the world. And you're ignorant of what the world is. And you're easily to be taken in by the world. I don't want Christian teachers, either at a public school or a Christian school, to be naive. I don't want them to be taken in. I want them to be the best. Can you imagine what it'd be like to prepare for the world that you're going into and then be an average employee? And because you're an average or a meaning kind of a sort of there as an employee, do you think other people are going to be interested in your faith because you're a lousy teacher? Do you think anybody's going to be interested in your faith because you're lousy on the stock market? People aren't interested in your faith because you're lousy at what you do. But for some reason, we as Christians a lot of times we just need to develop a relationship with Jesus Christ and then everything else will work out. What the world wants from us as believers is competence. What the world wants from us is to see something about who we are. And then if they see that we're competent, then they'll be interested in who we are as believers. If they don't see competence, they're not interested in us. Oh, you're at the bottom of the list? Nobody cares about our faith at that point. Only if we do it well. That's why I think careers matter. And I think Christians need to rise to the top of the career ladder rather than to stay at the median lower level of the career ladder. Because that's not interesting to us, is it? Why was Daniel? Daniel sticks in my head so often. Daniel was interested to people because he prayed in where did he pray? In private. Pardon me? In private. Yeah, but then where? Behind closed doors. How did they know he was praying? In the window. And would anybody have cared if he hadn't been at the top of his form? I mean, here was a guy who was captured by the bad guys. Would you try and escape? If the bad guys capture you and go back to the good country, you'd probably try and escape. He didn't. In fact, he learned the ways of that other country and then rose to the top in that secular country. And because he rose to the top in that secular country, that's when his prayers in the tower were offensive. Had he been kind of low-level kind of a guy, it wouldn't have happened that way at all. And by the way, he could only have gotten to the top and prayed in public like that if he had first done what? If he had first gone on a diet. Yeah. Because you see, if you master the fundamentals in life, then you can do the bigger things. I used to be a basketball coach. Yeah, it was a long time ago in a country far, far away. When we were good, we played Stanislaus State, we played Sacramento State, we played Humboldt State. When we were bad, we were very bad, and it was just embarrassing. You know, you want to get out of the gym as quickly as possible. But sometimes we were good, sometimes we weren't good. Why am I telling you that story? Thank you, because fundamentals are important to the basketball players. If I told them, you know, what I want you to do before the game starts is you have to touch the half-court line during the warm-ups. And if I can't trust you to touch the half-court line during the warm-ups, why would I trust you to run a pattern? Why would I trust you to run a play? Because it's the fundamentals, it's the basics in life that are going to make us successful later on. That's why when this college prof came up to me, we had to start all over again. We had to start with the basics. Because I didn't learn the basics when I was in elementary school. I didn't learn the basics in junior high. I didn't learn the basics in high school. But you have to start someplace and you have to get going on that particular situation with your life. Okay, where are we? Yeah, that matters, okay. Second thing that matters, family. You know, David Brooks got a book out this, any of you know David Brooks? Any of you watch PBS? Mm-hmm. Some of you watch PBS, which stands for? Pretty boring stuff, which is why most of you don't listen to it, because you're not interested in that kind. But David Brooks is on with Brooks and Shields on Friday night, I think, doing some interviews, and they're both pundits. They talk back and forth. He came out with a book this summer called The Road to Character. Excellent book. And he talked about resume virtues and eulogy virtues. The resume virtues are all those things that we do in college preparing for a career. The eulogy virtues are the things that we care about once that career is done. Family. If you choose to marry, who did you choose to share your life with? And then at some place along the way, you get in conflict. Career, family. Wait a minute. It's more fun at the office. At the office, I'm a person of importance. At the office, they take the trash out for me. At the office, all things good happen at the office, and I'm kind of in charge. I go home, and what does my wife say to me? Take the trash out. Do the dishes. And sometimes we fail to we lose the attractiveness for that family life and choose the career life. And we see that as more important. And it is not. Let me, without saying a lot of stories, let me just be clear here. If at the end of time or during this whole thing, if you're in conflict between choosing between family and career, I suggest you choose family. It may not seem to be the opportune thing at that particular time, but I think that's important to me. That matters to me. I would hope that it matters to you. It is easy to lose family. You know, there's this little phrase people throw about all the time, talk about all the time. They call it I'll just spend quality time with you. You know what quality time is? Yeah, I don't know either, but I know this. You're not going to get to quality time unless you first put in quantity time. You don't just sit down with somebody and say, okay, let's have this wonderful discussion right now. It's only after a while that you've had several discussions that you realize, wow, one of these became important. So you're not going to get to quality unless you first have quantity. And so family is so important to us. Third thing, what's the third thing that matters? Come on. Let's go with faith. I only have 3 things, people. And you're thinking, yeah, this is short chapel. Because, yeah. Faith matters. Yeah, and I have to start with the disclaimer. You know, if I would describe my faith, it would be a value village faith. I know a lot of you want to listen to people with the kind of a Nordstrom type of faith, where you go in and you come out with this nice suit of clothes and you know all the answers and everything seems workable and everything is great. And I've just never been that way. And for me, faith has always been a struggle. And maybe it's because, and I wrote this down so I wouldn't get confused, maybe because I graduated from a Wesleyan college, a Southern Baptist seminary, and a Jesuit university. Were there Christians in all those places?
Yes.
Yeah, were there people struggling in all those places? Were there some people who were just putting in form but no substance? They just called themselves something even though they were not inside. And then I attended a CMA church. Do any of you know what a CMA is? Most of you think it's Country Music Awards. No? Yeah, okay, I understand. So I attended a CMA church, a Presbyterian church in Berkeley, California, which was a great experience because it's set right on the edge of UC Berkeley. And on a Sunday morning, we would have Berkeley profs, we would have Berkeley students, and this wonderful experience with this pastor who was able to talk and make it clear that you could be a person of intelligence and still be a person of faith. Because a lot of people don't believe that anymore. But this pastor made that clear. And then after San Francisco, where I lived for 20 years, in Oregon I was Conservative Baptist. And here I'm Lutheran Brethren. And who knows what a Lutheran Brethren is? I don't know what it is. I can't sign the statement of faith there. They still let me attend. Amazing. They still let me do the pulpit once in a while. Even more amazing. I'm more comfortable as a Value Village Christian. Clothes don't match. Nothing seems to fit. Once in a while I struggle and I have to walk in and find out what this other group of people's doing and how they're allowing their faith to express itself. So having said that, and having spent 45 years, this is year 45, teaching in Christian schools. 20 in a little Christian college in San Francisco, 17 here now, and wow, they still let me teach here. I'm not Assembly of God, and I'm talking to you, and I'm not Assembly of God, and you're probably struggling with this whole thing about a Value Village faith. In all the schools I've been in, I've seen a lot of Christians. They may be front row jumpers. Do you know what front row jumpers are in chapel? They may be front row jumpers who seem to confuse emotions with faith. They may be backseat brainiacs who, unless they have it down theologically and intellectually, it doesn't seem to work with them. But all of these 45 years of doing this, how many people, how many students who firmly believed in their faith as the most important thing about them, walked away, gave it up, said, I no longer believe. That might be some of you. I don't know. So my last part of my last message to you is a caution. It is a warning that that's a possibility for all of you, and it depends on how you decide to practice your faith. I have 3 daughters. Yeah, they're older now. They're 3 adult daughters. One's 31, lives in Sweden, works for Spotify. Her husband does advertising in Sweden. One lives in Portland. Have any of you seen Portlandia? Yeah, she's straight out of Portlandia. She's that person entirely. And then one works in an asset management company on Lake Union. I don't know whose kid she was. I think we must have adopted her or something because she majored in college, she majored in cooking. And now she's doing asset management in Lake Union. When they were little, they carried stuffed animals. You know, we gave them stuffed animals. Their family gave them stuffed animals. Our third daughter, her name's Sarah, one of her uncles gave her a triceratops because she was the third daughter, and her name was Sarah, and she was tops. So they gave her a triceratops, and that became her favorite stuffed animal. All of them had stuffed animals where they were little unicorn horses or whatever they were, and it was one of those things. But now that they're doing their business and all this stuff they're doing, what would it be like today if they still carried those stuffed animals to work? What would the people think about them? Huh? They would think they were immature. So the question becomes, by necessity, by absolute necessity, when they were children, they had a childish faith. Now, just as they've taken the stuffed animals and they now reside in black plastic bags in the top of the attic, how have they changed that childish faith into a mature adult faith? Because I say to you, if you don't do that, and do it carefully, you're likely to give up the whole thing called faith. Because it's one thing to have the faith of a child, it's another thing to have a childish faith. And we need to distinguish between the two of those, because a childish faith is ugly to everybody, unless it's in a little kid. And what happens? Can they give it up? No. You know? I wrote this, kind of. It's called My Glow-in-the-Dark Jesus. And it's kind of a spiritual memoir. It's way too long. 120 some pages, and I wrote it for my daughters. I wrote it for my daughters because I know at some point in their lives they will wonder why they were raised the way they were. They will also wonder why their parents believed the way we did believe and do believe. And they might start to have those questions after mom and dad are gone. You know, I got an email just this morning. It was one of those serendipitous things. Wow, this came from my oldest one in Sweden today. And she said, Dad, where's my glow-in-the-dark Jesus notebook? I had emailed it to her, you know, as an attachment. She said, I can't find what happened to it. I only read the first chapter. Well, at least she got that far. But she wants to read. So what's happening with her right now, do you think? Pardon me, Rebecca?
A trial or a struggle.
She's probably wondering something about her faith. Is it real? Last Christmas, I hadn't seen her for a couple years. She was here for our daughter's wedding in last April, and she and I went on a long walk one afternoon, and she said, Dad, I want you to know I still believe. Well, that was last April. Maybe she's starting to struggle with the stuff now and wondering what to do. Is it easy to take that childish faith that we all grew up with out of necessity and turn it into an adult faith? What do we have to give up? I mean, it's easy to say, let's put the stuffed animals in the closet, up in the attic. But what do we give up from our faith in which we believe, our behaviors or our activities or whatever they are, that will make it a more mature faith without giving up everything? Because you see what often happens is when you don't do it correctly, you give up the whole thing and you throw, what's the common phrase they say? Yeah, exactly. And suddenly everything's gone. We fail to pick and choose. Who was it? Swiftly Tilting Planet, A Wrinkle in Time. Who was that? English majors? Madeline L'Engle said it this way. I'm so glad I didn't grow up in a Christian home, because I didn't have to unlearn all the wrong stuff that I was taught when I was little. Do you understand what she's saying about a lot of times what goes on in Christian homes? In churches? So, what was confusing for my faith when I was your age? I wrote down a couple things here. I think when I grew up, my parents completely confused biblical sins versus cultural taboos. Do you know the difference there? There are biblical sins, but they're also cultural taboos that we say, well, Christians don't do this. Somebody just the other day said, well, I don't understand. I can't believe he's a Christian. He's not wholesome. And I think, what does wholesome have to do with whether you're saved or not? Doesn't have anything to do with you're saved, but that's her understanding of what faith is. So for me, in the 50s, it was kind of spiritual McCarthyism. Do you remember the senator from Wisconsin? So if you were pink, you were red. And so you couldn't do anything. So for me, when I was we couldn't shoot pool. We couldn't go bowling. Of course, you couldn't play cards. And you couldn't dance. And all of you remember Shall We Dance? Remember the great line from Shall We Dance? Dancing is a vertical expression of a horizontal desire. That's what my parents thought, and that's what our churches thought. And so no, you can't dance if you're a Christian. You just can't do that. And we had scriptural texts to prove that. So that was a cultural taboo. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought it was clearly a biblical sin. Thou shalt not dance. But it was a cultural taboo. And here was where the problem started. As soon as you start recognizing what cultural taboos are and get rid of that taboo and realize, wow, I can do this and it's not sinful, then it's easy, once you give up some of that stuff, it's easy then to give up stuff that is biblically sinful and participate in those behaviors. And that's even more wrong. But you have to do this carefully. Because another assumption that I'd made was that all my conscience came from God. Anything that I thought was wrong or that I was told was wrong was a God-given conscience. Well, of course, God gives us our conscience, but it's also a cultural expression. And I had confused those kinds of things. Moving out of those things is not a simple thing to do. So the question you need to ask is, as you move from the faith, from a childish faith to the faith of a child, what should you put away? What should you put into the attic as a remnant of your childhood? You know, a song they still sing in my church on Easter Sunday morning is Up From the Grave He Arose. I don't know if you've ever heard that song before. It's in something they call a hymnal. I don't know, they used to sing hymns. I know it's all choruses now, and on Easter Sunday I'm sure it's all a lot of choruses, but they used to sing this song, Up From the Grave He Arose, with a mighty trumpet with a mighty triumph for his foes. And my youngest daughter went home after Easter one Sunday and said, Dad, she's in elementary school. Dad, I think I have this Christian thing down, but I don't understand Up From the Grave He Arose with a mighty trumpet for his nose. Because she couldn't understand. You see, she pictured it being this other way. And it's those wrong pictures that we have to correct to make our faith the faith of a child without being a childish faith. The third part and the last part of faith that I want to say to you is temptation. What are you tempted by? Yeah, except those temptations you're going to lose to those temptations. If you understand Matthew 5 through 7, which is the Sermon on the Mount, then you'll realize if you thought about it, you've done it. And so a lot of you think, yeah, I thought about it, so I may as well do it. Both are sins, so I may as well get the experience as well as just thinking about it. Which is another kind of consequences there. But so when it comes to the temptations that you're thinking about right now, all of you will fail at one time or another because Jesus made it clear. Thinking about it is doing it. The greatest temptation is in Acts 2, verse 13. I know it's a Christian school. Does anybody know what that is? Does anybody have their cell phone with them? Can look it up? This is the greatest temptation. Come on. I know you can call it.
Acts 2:13. Some, however, made fun of them and said they have had too much wine.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Do you see? Do you understand that? That's the concept of worldliness. Worldliness is right there. Not in the things we do, but in the way we think. So that's called reductionism. From the outside, the things that we do in chapel, the things that we do in church, look like we're inebriated. But that makes sense too in some ways, because realize when the early church, or the church I grew up in, said they didn't really have real wine then. It was really grape juice. But it's clear here that since they were looking at them and they were doing all this other stuff, that they understood alcohol matters. I mean, behavior changes when you drink alcohol, so it must have been pretty good alcohol that they thought the Christians had drank at that particular point at Pentecost. But here's what's going to happen to you. They thought they had interpreted a supernatural experience of Pentecost with the Holy Spirit coming in and given it a natural understanding to it. So the greatest temptation is not these little behaviors that we're afraid of now and then. The greatest temptation is giving up your faith. The greatest temptation is no longer seeing those things that we once saw as supernatural and now we interpret only in a naturalistic way. And so for me, the way it works out for me, this Value Village clad, poorly clothed, plaid pants, plaid shirt, plaid jacket. I'm thinking of the 70s or whatever it was we wore then. And all of a sudden, somebody says, well, this is a miracle. And I look, and if that's a miracle, I don't understand what you're talking about. And I've often had people say to me, well, that was a miracle. And I think, that's really not a miracle. No, I kind of struggle with that one. And the more I have people tell me that, the more I struggle with this thing called faith. And then on the other hand, I look, well, if you don't understand miracles, you don't understand anything. And so, help me believe. Because I like to believe that the people that see Jesus in cheeses, you know what that is? Where they make their cheese sandwich, grilled cheese sandwich, and they say Jesus in the middle of the sandwich after they turn it over, and there it is. I wish I saw that better. And I envy the people that see it there. And I envy some of you because you still see those. But what's going to happen when you start asking the question, is it really a miracle? Because you see, the world in which we live sees only, well, can I talk about Harry Potter? Is it all right? Yeah. Harry Potter is this, and she had it so clear, did she not? There's the natural world, and we call those muggles. Yeah. And then there's the supernatural world, and the supernatural world is broken into two groups. He who should not be named, which is Voldemort, and Harry. And we believe that, don't we? We believe in this supernatural world which has good and bad in it. So I love to see that in Harry Potter. And when my kids were growing up, we sat around the dining room and read Harry Potter together. It was great fun. But a lot of people say, no, we don't like that. So what I'm saying to you about your faith and what I'm saying to you about worldliness, be cautious. Be careful, people, because all of you will at some point reach the place in your faith where you will ask the question, is this of God or is this of man? Last thing, truly the last thing, truly. Bobby Kennedy had a brother, remember his brother? John Kennedy was killed in 1963. Bobby Kennedy was only the second living senator to be assassinated after Huey Long, who was a senator from Louisiana far earlier than that. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, 1968. I was actually a college student then. It's hard to believe, isn't it? So I watched television the next day, or a couple days later, as they were doing the funeral mass for Bobby Kennedy. And Ted Kennedy, now deceased Ted Kennedy, but he was a senator for a long time, he stood up front at that funeral mass and he said these few short words which I'll never forget. Bobby loved life dearly and lived it intently. A better eulogy I could not imagine is for you to do what with your life? Love it dearly and live it intently, because a lot of you will not. You will merely float through this thing called life. And then someday, you'll reach this old age, and you'll say, "See, what happened to it? It went by all too quickly." And trust me on this, it does and it will. That's why as believers, that's why as collegians, I want you to think about your life and to love it dearly. It is precious. It is exquisite. Nobody else has it anywhere else in this great universe in which we see the wonderful pictures. We alone have it. Don't just let it fritter away. Just don't let it go by. Do something with it. Do something with it for the sake of your calling. And you're not just called by God, you have been summoned by God. The Creator has summoned His creation. Not to let it float by, but to live it well. Sorry, I always end my classes the same way, so I'm going to do it this way too. And this is the end, okay? May the peace of the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Thank you, okay. Who's this?
All right, guys. Thank you all for coming. Thank you again, Dr. Kress, for coming and speaking for us.
You're still going to talk?
I'm just administrative.
Okay.
This is going to be available online. We'll get that link posted on the event page on Facebook if you guys are access to that. Our next last lecture is going to be in January. And have a good night.
You were going to bring it. You can do it tomorrow.